Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back into a world where the sun never quite sets on the hangover of an empire, a place where the air is thick with the scent of fermented honey and the metallic tang of lead-lined vats. You are standing in the middle of a bustling Roman street, and if you feel a little lightheaded, it's probably not just the heat. It's a fact that in this city, sobriety is a rare, almost mythical state of being. You probably won't survive this, mostly because your modern, pampered liver would likely stage a full-scale revolt after just one afternoon in a local tavern. But for now, let's just pretend you have the constitution of a centurion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is over there. I love knowing where in the world you're drifting off to. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the narrow, shadow-drenched alleys of the Subura district, your sandals clicking against the uneven basalt paving stones. The humidity is a physical weight, pressing the scent of charcoal smoke and open sewers into your skin. You're wearing a wool tunic that is just itchy enough to be annoying, a constant reminder of the grit of ancient life. Your head throbs with a rhythmic, dull ache, the kind of headache that feels like a tiny blacksmith is working on an anvil right behind your eyes. In 2025, you'd reach for an espresso or a couple of ibuprofen, but here in the first century, the only way forward is through the bottom of a ceramic cup. You find yourself drifting toward a popina, a Roman snack bar that's essentially the ancient version of a corner bodega, if that bodega also served hot, questionable stew and wine that could double as paint thinner. The counter is a slab of mismatched marble, and the air inside is cool but heavy with the smell of old wine spills and the pungent, pine-like aroma of resin. This isn't the refined wine culture you're used to, it's more like a constant, low-level chemical experiment. To a Roman, drinking wine straight is something only barbarians or people with a death wish do. It's a mainstream historical fact that Romans almost always diluted their wine with water, sometimes at a ratio of 3 parts water to 1 part wine, creating a beverage that functioned more like a continuous day-long hydration pack than a cocktail. You watch the tavern keeper reach for an amphora, one of those tall clay jars with the pointy bottoms that look like they'd be impossible to store. He cracks the seal, which is made of thick, black pitch. As the wine pours out, you notice it's not the clear, ruby liquid of a modern Cabernet. It's thick, slightly syrupy, and carries a strange, medicinal scent. This is where the stimulant part of the Roman diet kicks in. Because the Romans lacked modern preservation techniques, their wine often started turning into vinegar the moment it was finished. To fix this, they threw everything but the kitchen sink into the mix. You're talking about resins, gums, crushed herbs, and even seawater. Yes, a quirky and slightly stomach-turning fringe tidbit is that Romans often added seawater to their wine, believing it helped clarify the liquid and acted as a preservative, giving the drink a briny, salty kick that probably made them even thirstier. You take a sip of the warm spice liquid he hands you. It's flavored with honey and pepper, a concoction known as mulsum, which acts like a Roman version of a high-calorie energy drink. The sweetness is overwhelming, but there's a hidden danger lurking in that sugar. To get that perfect, addictive sweetness, Roman winemakers often boiled down unfermented grape juice in lead pots to create a syrup called sapa. It made the wine taste like liquid candy, but it also meant they were effectively microdosing themselves with heavy metals every single day. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of lead in Roman food and wine was a primary cause for the cognitive decline and erratic behavior of the Roman elite, or if the levels were just low enough to be a slow burning disaster rather than an empire ending poison. As you lean against the counter, the buzz starts to settle in. Not a sharp, clean intoxication, but a fuzzy, warm haze that rounds off the sharp edges of the city's noise. This wine isn't just a drink, it's the social lubricant that keeps the gears of the empire turning. It's the cable television of the masses, the only thing that makes the cramped, fire-prone apartment blocks and the constant threat of urban collapse bearable. You look at the other patrons, a construction worker covered in white marble dust, a weary clerk with ink stains on his fingers, and a soldier whose armor is more rust than iron. They're all partaking in this liquid diet, a collective, empire-wide refusal to face reality while entirely sober. The spices in your cup, myrrh, cassia, and cinnamon, begin to tingle on your tongue. These aren't just for flavor, they're believed to have invigorating properties. In a world without caffeine, these botanical additives were the closest thing you had to a pre-workout supplement. You feel a strange surge of energy, a restless need to move, even as your legs feel a bit heavier. It's a contradictory state of being, a stimulated sedation that defined the Roman psyche. You are ready to conquer Gaul, or perhaps just find a quiet corner to take a very long nap. The tavern keeper wipes the counter with a rag that has clearly seen better decades. He offers you another cup, this one infused with wormwood, a precursor to absinthe. It's bitter, medicinal, and supposedly good for the digestion, but it adds another layer of hallucinogenic potential to your afternoon. You realize that for a Roman, the goal of drinking wasn't just to get drunk, it was to reach a specific state of altered readiness. You weren't just checking out, you were checking into a different version of the world where the gods felt a little closer and the taxes felt a little further away. You step back out into the light, the marble temples of the Forum gleaming in the distance like polished teeth. The city is a masterpiece of architecture and a disaster of human density, and the only way to navigate it is with this resin-scented armor around your mind. The wine, the lead, the spices, they are the invisible threads that hold your day together. You feel the grit of the city under your fingernails and the warmth of the spiced wine in your chest. A steady, pulsing rhythm that matches the heartbeat of Rome itself. The empire is a machine that runs on fermented grapes and botanical fire, and you are just one small, slightly tipsy cog in the works. As the sun begins to dip lower, casting long golden shadows across the marketplace, you realize that this liquid diet is what makes the impossible possible. It allows the legionary to march 20 miles in heavy kit and the poet to find rhymes in a gutter. It's a dangerous, beautiful, and ultimately exhausting way to live. But for now, the headache is gone, replaced by a floating sensation that makes the uneven stones feel like clouds. You take one last look at the tavern, the smell of pine resin lingering in your nostrils, and prepare to move deeper into the Roman night, where the stimulants get stronger and the reality gets even thinner. The wine's warm glow is still humming in your ears as you wander away from the tavern and toward the shaded stalls of the herbalist or pharmacopoly. If the tavern was the ancient version of a happy hour, this place is more like a high-stakes, dark web pharmacy where the terms and conditions are written in a language you can't quite read. And the privacy policy basically says, good luck, you're on your own. You move through a curtain of drying herbs that smell like dusty hay and something sharper. Something that reminds you of the back of a damp cupboard. Here, the stimulants and sedatives aren't just additives, they are the heavy hitters. the botanical big guns of the Roman world. You stop in front of a table where a man with dirt-clotted fingernails is carefully arranging roots that look disturbingly like tiny, twisted human bodies. This is the mandrake, the celebrity of the Roman medicine cabinet. It's a mainstream historical fact that Romans used mandrake wine as a surgical anesthetic, allowing doctors to perform grisly tasks like amputations or bone setting without the patient punching them in the face. It contains scopolamine and hyoscyamine, chemicals that don't just dull pain, they disconnect you from reality entirely. In a world before sterile operating rooms, medicine was really just polite torture with a theology degree, and the mandrake was the only thing standing between you and a very loud afternoon of screaming. You pick up one of the roots, feeling its cold, waxy texture. It's heavy for its size, and it seems to pulse with a low-frequency energy that makes the tips of your fingers tingle. You've heard the stories, the kind of urban legends that functioned as the TikTok challenges of the ancient world. They say that if you pull a mandrake root from the earth, it lets out a scream so piercing, so supernatural, that it kills anyone who hears it. Because of this, the harvest is a complex, almost slapstick operation. A quirky and fringe tidbit is that Roman harvesters would supposedly tie a dog to the plant with a long rope, walk a safe distance away, and then lure the dog with a piece of meat. The dog would pull, the root would scream, the dog would unfortunately drop dead, and the humans would have their precious drug. It's a pretty raw deal for the dog, but in the Roman hierarchy of needs, a pain-free surgery definitely ranked higher than canine longevity. As you stand there, the herbalist whispers about the dosage. This is the part where your modern brain starts screaming for a standardized FDA label. A little bit of mandrake wine helps you sleep. A little more, and you're having a conversation with a three-headed goat. A little more than that, and you're just a very expensive corpse. Historians still argue whether these elaborate harvest rituals, like the dog and the scream, were genuine folk beliefs or if they were just clever trade secrets cooked up by herbalists to keep the common people from foraging their own supply and cutting into the profit margins. It's the ancient version of an authorized dealer-only sticker, backed up by the threat of instant metaphysical death. Next to the mandrake sits a jar of dried henbane, or Hyoscyamus niger. If mandrake is a heavy-duty sedative, henbane is the wild card of the stimulant world. It's a tall, sticky plant with a smell that can only be described as aggressively fermented roadkill. You lean in to sniff it, a mistake you realize the moment the scent hits your brain. It's sickly sweet and rotting at the same time. The Romans used henbane for everything from earaches to insomnia, but its most famous side effect was the madness. In small doses, it makes you feel like you're floating in a warm bath of static. In larger doses, it causes visual hallucinations where the walls start to breathe and your friends start looking like hungry wolves. You imagine a Roman matron using henbane-infused oil as a beauty. Treatment. It dilates the pupils, giving the eyes a wide, dark, and mysterious look. The original Instagram filter for the elite who wanted to look eternally surprised or deeply profound. But the trade-off is a heart rate that feels like a hummingbird trapped in the shoebox. You can feel your own pulse quickening just looking at the stuff. Your skin feels a bit tight, a bit too small for your body, a common sensation when your nervous system is being poked by these belladonna family alkaloids. The herbalist watches you with pupils so wide they're almost all black. He's clearly been testing his own inventory. He offers you a small vial of henbane juice, suggesting it's perfect for divine inspiration. In Rome, being high out of your mind wasn't always seen as a personal failing. Sometimes it was seen as being touched by a god. You're navigating a society where the line between a medical emergency and a religious experience is thinner than a piece of papyrus. If you start seeing visions of Jupiter in your breakfast porridge, the Romans wouldn't necessarily call a doctor. They may just ask you for the lottery numbers. You feel a drop of sweat roll down your neck, the itchy wool of your tunic suddenly feeling like a suit of sandpaper. The air in the stall is stagnant, filled with the microscopic dust of a dozen different poisons. You realize that health in this era is a delicate balancing act. You're constantly microdosing yourself to stay ahead of the pain, the exhaustion, and the sheer grinding reality of life in a city of 1 million people. These plants are the restart buttons for a hardware system that was never meant to run this hot. As you turn to leave, your foot catches on a loose stone, and for a second, the world tilts. Is it the wine from earlier, or just the fumes from the henbane? It's hard to tell. The sounds of the market, the shouting vendors, the clatter of carts, the distant braying of a donkey, all seem to merge into a single, droning hum. You feel like you're walking through a dream, or perhaps a memory of a dream. The Roman world is a sensory overload, a kaleidoscope of sights and smells that are constantly being filtered through a haze of botanical interference. You tuck the imaginary vial into your belt, a souvenir of a world where the pharmacy was a garden and the pharmacist was a guy who might accidentally kill you if he had a bad day. The mandrake and the henbane are waiting in the shadows, silent partners in the Roman story, providing the quiet that the city denies you. You trudge forward, your steps a little more uncertain, your mind a little more cluttered, heading toward the heart of the city where the most famous Roman stimulant of all is waiting to be found in the red glow of the poppy fields. You leave the herbalist's stall behind, but the air doesn't get much fresher as you push deeper into the heart of the Roman market. The smell of frying dough and heavy fish sauce competes with the scent of something sweeter, something more floral, yet dangerously earthy. You are looking for the tears of the poppy, the substance that makes the mandrake and henbane look like amateur hour. In the Roman Empire, opium isn't some clandestine back alley secret. It's the ultimate universal restart button for the human system. If your life in the city feels like a high-speed chariot race with no brakes, opium is a guy who steps in and simply turns off the track. You stop at a stall where small dried cakes of poppy juice are stacked like tiny, dark cookies. It's a mainstream historical fact that opium was widely available, legal, and shockingly cheap across the Roman Empire, often sold in the markets right alongside bread and oil. This wasn't a luxury for the rich, it was the Roman version of a 24-hour pharmacy, available to anyone with a few copper coins and a reason to forget their troubles. Whether you were a soldier with a nagging spear wound, or a merchant who just lost a shipment of silk in a shipwreck, the poppy was there to tell you that actually everything is fine. You pick up one of the cakes, feeling its dense, slightly gummy texture. It has a bitter, musk-like smell that seems to bypass your nose and go straight to the back of your throat. To get this stuff, Roman farmers would head out into the fields at dawn, scoring the green seed pods of the Papaver somniferum with a sharp knife. They'd leave the white milk to seep out and dry in the sun until it turned into a sticky, brown latex. It's a process that hasn't changed much in thousands of years. You imagine the labor, thousands of tiny cuts, thousands of drops collected by hand, just to provide a few hours of artificial peace. It's like a manual software update for the brain, except the update takes 6 hours and you might wake up forgetting where you parked your horse. You watch an old man buy a small piece, dissolve it into a cup of diluted wine, and drink it down with a practiced shrug. For him, this isn't a trip, it's just Roman aspirin. He's using it for a cough, or maybe just to survive the noise of the neighboring apartment, where someone is definitely practicing the lyre very badly. In Rome, sleep is a luxury. The city is famous for its night noise. Carts are banned during the day, so the cobblestones rattle all night long with the sound of iron-rimmed wheels. Opium was the only noise-canceling headphone the ancient world had to offer. It didn't stop the sound, but it made you not care that the walls were thin enough to hear your neighbor chewing his bread. But while the commoners used it for sleep and minor aches, the elite were playing a much more complex game. This leads us to the most prestigious drug cocktail in history, Theriac. This wasn't just a medicine, it was a status symbol, a luxury health retreat in a bottle. Theriac was an incredibly complex electuary that contained opium mixed with dozens of other ingredients, ranging from cinnamon and honey to roasted nuts and, wait for it, viper flesh. A quirky and fringe tidbit is that Romans believed the flesh of a venomous snake, if processed correctly, could act as a universal antidote to all other poisons. It's the ultimate hair of the dog logic. To protect yourself from poison, you eat the thing that makes the poison. You imagine the emperor's private physician carefully weighing out these bits of dried snake, mixing them into a bitter, dark sludge that the ruler of the known world would consume every single morning. Historians still argue whether the famous philosopher emperor Marcus Aurelius was actually a high-functioning opium addict. He took a dose of Theriac daily to manage his chronic stomach pains and chest issues, and some scholars suggest that the dreamy, detached quality of his famous meditations might have been influenced by the steady, low-level hum of the poppy in his system. It gives Stoicism a whole new meaning when you realize the guy writing about the fleeting nature of life might have been seeing the world through a very thin golden veil of narcotics. As you stand in the market, you feel a phantom heaviness in your own limbs, a sympathetic reaction to the environment. The sun is baking the stone, and the hum of the crowd starts to sound like the buzzing of a distant beehive. The Roman relationship with opium was one of pure pragmatism. They didn't have the war on drugs mindset. They had a keep the empire running mindset. If a centurion is too depressed to lead his men, give him a poppy cake. If a senator's gout is flaring up, give him a poppy cake. It was the grease on the wheels of society. However, medicine is really just polite torture with a theology degree when you realize that without any way to measure purity, a bad batch could turn your afternoon nap into an eternal one. You notice a woman nearby buying a small vial of poppy syrup for a crying infant. It's a sobering reminder that the ancient world didn't have many options. You either endured the pain or you took a gamble on the garden. There was no middle ground, no sanitized blister packs with a list of side effects in 4-point font. The side effects were well known: constipation, lethargy, and a strange, hollow look in the eyes. But when the alternative is a toothache that feels like a lightning strike, you take the lethargy every single time. The air in this part of the market is thick and stagnant. You feel like you're walking through a soup of human breath and botanical dust. Your modern sensibilities are screaming about dosage and regulation, but here, the only regulator is the herbalist's reputation and your own luck. You look at the dark, gummy cakes one last time and decide to move on. You don't need a restart button just yet. You have more of the city to see, and the sun is still high enough to cast sharp, unforgiving shadows. You turn a corner, leaving the pharmacy of the masses behind, and head toward the more atmospheric, incense-heavy air of the temples. The stimulants are about to get less about pain relief and much more about divine intervention. You've seen how the Romans managed their bodies. Now it's time to see how they manage their souls, with a little help from the things that grow in the dark. The transition from the earthy bitterness of opium to the sweet, suffocating clouds of sacred incense is about to take your altered state to a whole new level of I definitely shouldn't have drank that wine. The earthy, heavy scent of the poppy stalls fades as you climb the marble steps toward the Aventine Hill, where the air starts to taste different, thicker, sweeter, and significantly more expensive. You're moving away from the pharmacy of the poor and toward the high-end spiritual rebranding of the Roman high. You can feel the vibration of drums before you hear them, a low, rhythmic thrumming that seems to resonate in the soles of your feet. You are heading toward a temple of Bacchus, the god who is basically the patron saint of, I don't remember last night, but I'm pretty sure I had a great time. In the Roman world, religion wasn't just about kneeling and whispering, it was a full body, sensory overloading experience designed to knock you out of your boring, tax paying life and into the lap of the divine. As you reach the temple courtyard, you are hit by a wall of smoke. This isn't the gray, choking smoke of a house fire, it's a dense blue-white fog that smells like the inside of an expensive perfume bottle that's been left out in the sun. It's a mainstream historical fact that Roman temples burned staggering amounts of frankincense and myrrh, often importing it at a cost that would make a modern billionaire's yacht look like a bargain. But this isn't just for the smell. In the cramped, enclosed spaces of the inner sanctum, these resins create a smoke machine effect that does more than just look cool in the torchlight. At high concentrations, the smoke is mildly psychoactive, inducing a light-headed, euphoric state that makes the giant, unblinking eyes of the cult statues look like they're actually watching you. You push through a crowd of people who are already deep into the festivity. Some are dancing with a frantic, jerky energy, while others are simply staring at the ceiling, their mouths slightly agape. This is the Bacchanalia, or the festivals of Liber Pater, and it's essentially the ancient world's version of a 3-day desert rave, but with more marble and significantly fewer glow sticks. You're wearing your best toga for this, though by now it's stained with a mixture of spilled wine and mystery oil. You feel the sweat cooling on your forehead, but the air in the courtyard is strangely hot, heated by dozens of bronze braziers. It's less like a church service and more like a VIP lounge at a nightclub where the security is also the clergy. You notice a priestess carrying a gilded bowl of special wine, which she offers to the crowd. This isn't the diluted, salty stuff from the tavern. This is the high-octane version, often laced with things like henbane or stramonium to ensure the participants reach a state of ecstasis, literally standing outside of oneself. A quirky and fringe tidbit is that some of these festival wines were reportedly mixed with mad honey, a rare honey produced by bees that fed on rhododendrons, which contains granulotoxins. Drink enough of it and you don't just feel drunk, you feel like you've been hit by a spiritual lightning bolt, complete with dizziness, blurred vision, and the sudden urge to tell everyone that you've personally spoken to a satyr. You take a small sip, and your tongue immediately goes numb. The taste is bitter, hidden behind a thick layer of honey and crushed rose petals. Suddenly, the music feels louder. The clashing of cymbals sounds like it's happening inside your own skull. Historians still argue whether the madness of the Bacchic cults, those famous stories of women tearing apart lions with their bare hands, was a literal, drug-induced frenzy or just a very effective piece of anti-cult propaganda used by the Roman government to justify cracking down on these secret societies. After all, a group of people who are high on hallucinogens and don't recognize the authority of the state is a bit of a nightmare for a government that runs on discipline and paperwork. You lean against a fluted column, trying to find your Balance. The world is starting to look like a painting where the paint hasn't quite dried yet. The flickering torchlight creates long, dancing shadows that seem to detach themselves from the walls and join the dancers. You realize that for a Roman, this divine frenzy was a necessary safety valve. Life in the empire was rigid. You had your place, your duties, and your social credit score to maintain. The festival was the one place where the stimulants allowed you to break the rules. It was a spiritual vacation from the self. If you ended up waking up in a gutter with a wreath of ivy around your neck and a vague memory of becoming a leopard, that was just a sign of a successful ritual. The air gets even thicker as more incense is tossed onto the coals. You start to feel a strange, prickling sensation on your skin, like tiny insects crawling under the itchy wool of your tunic. This is the itch of the gods, a common sensory side effect of some of the botanical additives used in the sacred smoke. You're floating now, the floor beneath your sandals feeling like it's made of sponge rather than stone. You see a man nearby who has completely checked out. He's talking to a statue of Bacchus as if they're old college roommates discussing a bad investment. It's hilarious, but also deeply unsettling. You're witnessing a collective, state-sanctioned glitch in the matrix, powered by the things that grow in the dark corners of the Mediterranean. But the Roman state had a love-hate relationship with this kind of behavior. While they loved the idea of keeping the gods happy, they hated anything they couldn't control. You might remember that in 186 BC, the Senate went on a full-scale war on raves, banning the Bacchanalia across Italy and executing thousands of participants. They claimed it was to stop moral decay, but really they were just terrified of people who were too high to care about Roman law. It was the original war on drugs, but framed as a war on bad vibes that threatened the stability of the Republic. You can still feel the echoes of that ancient tension here in the smoke. The feeling that you are doing something transgressive, something that the sober world outside would never understand. The drumming speeds up, the tempo reaching a fever pitch. You find yourself swaying, your modern inhibitions melting away in the heat of the braziers. The smell of the incense is so strong now, it almost has a physical weight, like a warm blanket being pressed against your face. You're not just watching the ritual anymore, you're part of it. The stimulants have done their job, bridging the gap between the mundane and the miraculous. You feel a sudden surge of divine energy, a feeling that you could run for miles or climb to the top of the Pantheon without breaking a sweat. It's a powerful, dangerous lie that your brain is telling you, courtesy of the plant kingdom. As a first hint of dawn starts to pale the sky above, the open roof of the temple, the energy begins to shift. The frantic dancing slows to a languid, exhausted shimmy. People are collapsing onto the marble floors, draped over each other like discarded laundry. The spiritual high is beginning to transition into the imperial hangover. You feel a massive, looming crash waiting for you just around the corner. But for now, the smoke still curls around the pillars, and the eyes of the gods still seem to glow in the dying torchlight. You've survived the festival, but the Roman world has one more high-performance stimulant to show you, the kind used not for prayer, but for blood. The temple hangover is a physical presence now, a heavy, vibrating pressure behind your eyes that makes the morning sun feel like a personal insult. You leave the quiet, smoke-filled sanctuary of Bacchus and head toward the massive, looming silhouette of the Flavian amphitheater, the Colosseum. The air here doesn't smell like expensive incense. It smells like hot sand, unwashed bodies, and the sharp, metallic tang of blood and iron. If the tavern was the city's living room and the temple was its soul, the The arena is its adrenal gland. You are here to see the high-performance side of Roman stimulants, where the stakes aren't just a spiritual vision, but whether or not you get to keep your head attached to your shoulders. You push through the crowd, your sandals crunching on discarded fruit peels and chicken bones. You find a spot near the railings, close enough to see the sweat glistening on the skin of the fighters below. These aren't just men. They are high-value assets, the professional athletes of the ancient world. And just like a modern NFL player or a Tour de France cyclist, a gladiator is looking for any edge he can get. You notice a group of fighters in the tunnels, preparing for their entry. They aren't just stretching, they're drinking, they're downing a thick gray concoction that looks like liquid sludge. It's a mainstream historical fact that gladiators regularly consumed a tonic made of charred wood ash dissolved in water. It sounds absolutely revolting, like a wellness shot from a hipster cafe that's gone horribly wrong, but it was actually a highly effective way to replenish calcium and minerals after intense training. It's the original Gatorade, just with more fireplace and less blue raspberry flavor. But as you watch them, you notice some of the men have a strange, twitchy energy. Their pupils are pinpricks, and they seem to be ignoring the flies crawling across their faces. This is where the darker stimulants come into play. Before a match, many gladiators would be given medications to increase their aggression or dull the anticipation of pain. A quirky and fringe tidbit is that some fighters were reportedly given microdoses of Nux vomica, the seeds from which strychnine is derived. In tiny, sublethal amounts, strychnine acts as a powerful central nervous system stimulant, sharpening the reflexes and making the user feel a sense of manic invincibility. It's essentially the ancient world's version of a pre-workout powder that could literally kill you if the trainer's hand slipped while measuring the dose. It's a terrifying gamble. You either become a whirlwind of steel on the sand, or your muscles lock up in a fatal convulsion before the first trumpet even blows. You look up toward the imperial box, where the purple canopy provides the only real shade in the stadium. Sitting there, draped in silk and gold, is the man who holds the restart button for the entire empire. Today, he looks a bit off. His skin has a sallow, waxy sheen, and he's staring at the arena with an intensity that feels less like interest and more like a trance. This is the imperial madness that defined so many Roman rulers. You've heard the rumors. The emperor doesn't sleep. He spends his nights wandering the palace talking to statues of Jupiter or planning to name his horse as a consul. Historians still argue whether the erratic and often violent behavior of emperors like Caligula, Nero, or Commodus was the result of hereditary mental illness, the toxic effects of lead poisoning from their sweetened wine, or a chronic high-level dependency on the Roman pharmacy we've been exploring. When you have unlimited access to the best opium, the strongest henbane, and the most concentrated mandrake, your grip on reality is bound to get a little slippery. It's like watching a chaotic high-stakes live stream where the host has been awake for 4 days and has access to a nuclear arsenal. You're never quite sure if the next command will be a lavish feast or a mass execution. The first fight begins, and the sound is overwhelming. The clash of shields is like a rhythmic industrial techno beat, and the roar of 50,000 people is a physical wall of sound. You see a gladiator take a shallow cut across his ribs. In any other setting, he'd be doubled over, but he doesn't even flinch. He keeps moving, his eyes locked on his opponent with a terrifying, glassy focus. Is it the strychnine? Is it the adrenaline? Or is it the special wine he was given in the barracks? The Roman world doesn't care about fair play. They care about the show. They want the fighters to be faster than humanly possible and more durable than any mortal should be. You feel a strange, hollow sensation in your gut. The excitement of the crowd is infectious, but there's a bitterness to it, like the aftertaste of the wormwood wine. You realize that this entire civilization is running on a borrowed energy. The soldiers at the borders are chewing on stimulating herbs to stay awake on watch. The poets in the city are using opium to find their metaphors. The emperors are using everything to stay sane, or at least stay functional. It's an empire that never hits the pause button because the moment it stops moving, the collective hangover might just be enough to bring the whole thing crashing down. A joke starts circulating among the people near you. They say the emperor is so enlightened today because he's finally found a doctor who can prescribe the moon. It's a dark, whispered laugh, the kind of humor you use when the guy in charge is clearly hallucinating. You join in, but your heart isn't in it. The sun is beating down on your head, and the smell of the arena, a mix of animal musk, sweat, and that persistent, lead-sweetened wine, is making your head spin again. You're witnessing the peak of Roman power, but it feels fragile, like a glass vase that's been dropped and is currently in the process of shattering, held together only by the sheer force of its own momentum and a very large amount of narcotics. The gladiator in the arena finally falls, not because he felt the pain, but because his body simply stopped working. The stimulants can hide the damage, but they can't repair it. The crowd cheers, a deafening explosion of sound that makes the birds circling above scatter in fear. You take a deep breath, trying to clear the arena dust from your lungs, but it feels like it's stuck there. The Roman world is a masterpiece of engineering and a nightmare of biology. As you turn to leave, navigating your way through the exiting throngs of people who are already looking for their next drink or their next distraction, you feel a shift in the air. The Roman sun is starting to set on this part of your journey. The marble, the wine, the blood, it's all starting to blur into a different kind of history. You're moving away from the Mediterranean heat and toward a world that's darker, wetter, and much more mechanical. The stimulants of the future won't just be things you drink, they'll be the machines you carry. You're leaving the dope of the emperors behind and heading toward the tension of the Middle Ages, where your survival depends on a very different kind of high-performance tool. The sun-baked marble of Rome and the sweet leaden haze of the arena dissolve into a gray, oppressive mist. You wake up, and instead of a warm Mediterranean breeze, you are greeted by the sensation of a cold raindrop sliding down the back of your neck, finding its way perfectly between the gap of your hood and your shoulders. The world has gotten a lot wetter, a lot muddier, and significantly more complicated. You are no longer a spectator in the sun. You are a professional crossbowman in the heart of the Middle Ages, and your life is currently being dictated by the humidity levels of a northern European forest. You are wearing a gambeson, which is essentially a thick, quilted tunic stuffed with scrap wool or linen. In theory, it's meant to stop a sword strike. In practice, when it's raining like this, it's like wearing a heavy, waterlogged mattress that smells like a wet dog and wood smoke. Your boots are caked in a thick, clay-like mud that makes every step feel like you're trying to walk through a bowl of cold oatmeal. You probably won't survive this, not because of a heroic charge, but because of a localized infection or the sheer frustration of trying to keep your equipment dry in a climate that hates you. Beside you, leaning against a damp wooden cart, is your crossbow. If the Roman legionary's gladius was a simple, reliable tool, your crossbow is a temperamental, high-maintenance piece of machinery. It's the original point-and-click interface of the medieval world, but the loading screen takes forever. In an era where most people's tech support consists of a local priest and a bucket of holy water, you are essentially a field technician for a weapon that is more diva than death dealer. It is a mainstream historical fact that while a longbowman could fire 10 to 12 arrows a minute, a crossbowman like you is lucky to get off 2 or 3. You are the dial-up internet of the battlefield. Slow, noisy, but once you finally connect, the impact is undeniable. You run a calloused thumb over the bowstring, which is made of tightly twisted hemp or sinew. It feels soft, dangerously soft. This is your primary nightmare. The crossbow is held together by tension and chemistry, specifically hide glue made from boiled down animal parts. A quirky and fringe tidbit is that the most elite crossbows of this era use glue made from the bladders of sturgeons, a substance so sticky and durable it was the gorilla glue of the 14th century. However, all that glue is water soluble. If the humidity gets too high, or if you're caught in a downpour, your expensive, high-tension weapon will literally start to melt in your hands. You're currently carrying a very heavy, very expensive piece of wood that is slowly turning back into a collection of sticks and jelly. You pull a small piece of animal fat from a pouch at your belt and begin rubbing it into the string. It's a pungent, greasy task that leaves your fingers smelling like a butcher's shop that's lost power in July. You're trying to waterproof the fiber, desperate to keep the tension high. Every other soldier is worrying about the enemy. You're worrying about the barometric pressure. If the string stretches just a few millimeters, your accuracy goes out the window, and you'll find yourself shooting at the clouds instead of the French knights currently gathering on the opposite ridge. You look at the nut, the rotating cylindrical trigger that holds the string. It's made of bone or iron, and it's the only thing standing between the massive energy stored in the bow and your own fingers. If it slips, the bow could shatter, sending splinters into your face like a medieval fragmentation grenade. Medicine is still mostly polite torture with a theology degree, so if that happens, your healthcare plan involves a hot iron and a prayer. Historians still argue whether the famous Second Lateran Council ban of 1139, which forbade the use of crossbows against fellow Christians because they were hateful to God, was ever actually enforced, or if it was just a moral terms of service that every king simply clicked agree on while fully intending to ignore it. After all, when a peasant with a week of training can drop a nobleman who has spent 20 years practicing the sword, morality usually takes a back seat to winning. You hear the distant sound of a bell, the medieval alarm clock ringing from a nearby village. It signals the start of the morning maneuvers. You try to crank the windlass, the mechanical winch used to draw the string back. The iron gears are cold and slick with moisture, and they let out a screech that sounds like a banshee with a stubbed toe. It's an exhausting, slow process. You're putting your whole body weight into it, your muscles burning under the itchy wool of your gambeson. Modern audiences might compare this to a Windows update that gets stuck at 99%. You're just standing there, vulnerable and sweating, while the world moves on around you. The air is thick with the smell of the camp. Roasting salt pork, open latrines, and the metallic tang of sharpening stones. You take a sip of thin, sour ale from a leather flagon. It's not the spiced wine of Rome. It's a murky, yeasty brew that tastes like fermented bread and disappointment. But it's the only thing that keeps the crossbowman's twitch at bay. That constant, low-level anxiety that your weapon is going to fail at the exact moment a knight decides to make you his personal project. You look across the field at the snobs of the army, the archers with their long bows. They look down on you. They think their organic, artisanal bows are superior because they require skill and years of practice. You, on the other hand, are the representative of the Industrial Revolution 500 years too early. You don't need to be a hero. You just need to be a guy with a machine. You're a peasant. Sniper. A disruption to the social order that relies on expensive armor and hereditary titles. You're the reason knights are starting to feel like they're wearing outdated hardware. As the fog begins to lift, revealing the dark line of the enemy's lances, you feel a surge of that old, familiar tension. Your crossbow is finally cocked, the bolt, the quarrel, resting in its groove. It's a short, heavy piece of wood tipped with a steel head designed to punch through iron like it's wet cardboard. You've spent the last hour fighting the weather, the grease, and the physics of animal glue, but for this one moment, the machine is ready. Your hands are stained with fat and mud, your back hurts from the winch, and you're pretty sure you have a fungal infection growing in your left boot, but you are the most dangerous man on this field for the next 10 seconds. You take a deep breath, the damp air filling your lungs with the scent of wet earth and impending chaos. You've survived the maintenance. Now, you just have to survive the battle. You tuck the stock of the crossbow into your shoulder, feeling the vibration of the stored energy through the wood. It's a silent, humming power, a mechanical ghost waiting to be released. The Middle Ages are loud, messy, and remarkably damp, but they have a certain cranky charm that Rome never had. You're moving forward now, one muddy step at a time, toward the shield wall where the real work begins. The fog has finally surrendered to a dull, persistent drizzle, and the air is about to get a lot more crowded with flying metal. You aren't just standing out in the open like a target at a county fair, hoping the enemy archers have bad eyesight. No, you have brought your own personal no-entry zone, the pavis. It's essentially a tall, rectangular shield that looks like someone ripped a heavy oak front door off its hinges, added a central ridge for strength, and slapped on a kickstand. It's your portable bunker, your mobile privacy screen, and the only reason you haven't been turned into a human pincushion yet. You lug the heavy thing forward, your boots sinking into the churned up earth with a wet sucking sound. The pavis is nearly as tall as you are and just as wide, decorated with the painted image of a saint who looks significantly more worried about your situation than you'd like. You find a relatively firm patch of ground and slam the base of the shield into the mud, kicking the wooden prop into place behind it. Now, you are tucked away in your own little world of damp wood and leather straps. To a modern eye, this looks like a riot shield from the future, but for you, it's the only way to survive the reloading screen of your life. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Genoese crossbowmen were the most famous users of the pavis, turning the battlefield into a series of mini fortresses that could slowly creep toward the enemy lines. These men were the high-priced consultants of the medieval world. You didn't hire them because they were brave. You hired them because they were professional and they brought their own walls. You crouch behind the shield, the sound of the rain hitting the wood sounding like a drum roll of tiny, persistent fingers. You feel a strange sense of claustrophobia mixed with relief. Inside this tiny wooden sanctuary, the smell of your own unwashed wool and the metallic tang of your crossbow grease is overwhelming. But it's a lot better than the smell of an incoming arrow. Now comes the part where you look like you're trying to start a stubborn lawnmower from the 14th century. To load your weapon, you have to stoop down, hook your foot into the iron stirrup at the front of the bow, and attach the heavy winch to the string. While you're bent over, cranking that iron handle with both hands, your backside is essentially an invitation for every enemy archer within 100 yards. This is why the pavis is your best friend. You are performing a complex mechanical task in the middle of a murder zone. Remember that stimulated sedation the Romans loved? You could really use some of that spiced wine right now, or maybe a bit of that universal restart opium because your heart is currently trying to beat its way out of your chest. Instead, you have to settle for the rhythmic, mechanical click, click, click of the windlass gears. As you crank, you hear a dull thwack against the other side of your shield. Then another. It sounds like someone is throwing heavy rocks at your front door. You don't need to look to know what it is. Cloth yard shafts from the longbowmen on the other side. They're trying to find the gaps, trying to wait for that 1 second when you peek your head out to aim. A quirky and fringe tidbit that often gets overlooked is that pavises weren't just static walls. In a pinch, they were frequently used as emergency stretchers to carry wounded comrades off the field, or even as sleds to drag heavy gear across particularly treacherous mud. They were the Swiss Army knives of defensive furniture. You finish the crank, the string locking into the bone nut with a satisfying, heavy snap. You reach for a bolt from your quiver, a short, thick projectile that makes a Roman arrow look like a toothpick. You slide it into the groove, the steel head gleaming even in the gray light. You are now a fully loaded weapon of war, but you're still hiding behind your decoyer. This is the psychological game of the crossbowman. You aren't a knight seeking glory in a head-on charge. You're a technician looking for a clean shot. Historians still argue whether the extreme weight and bulk of the pavis actually hindered mobility so much that it caused more death than it prevented during a retreat. If the line breaks and you have to run, do you leave your wall behind, or do you try to carry 60 pounds of oak through a swamp while a horseman tries to lance you? It's the medieval version of trying to decide whether to save your heavy laptop during a fire. You take a deep breath, the damp air smelling of wet earth and wood smoke. You peek around the edge of the pavis, your eye catching the glint of sun on a knight's breastplate a few hundred yards away. He's moving with a confidence that suggests he thinks his armor makes him invincible. You know better. You know that the tension stored in your bow, hundreds of pounds of kinetic energy held, backed by a single piece of bone, is more than a match for any nobleman's vanity. You pull the pavis slightly to the left, adjusting your bunker to get a better angle. The man next to you, another shield bearer or pavisier, gives you a grim nod. His job is to hold the shield steady and protect you while you do the fancy work with the winch. He's the unsung hero of the crossbow unit, the guy who basically acts as a human support beam. You can see the white of his knuckles as he grips the leather handles. He's not even looking at the enemy. He's staring at the saint painted on the wood, whispering a prayer that sounds remarkably like a list of grievances. You realize that your survival depends entirely on this two-man choreography. If he flinches, you're a target. If you're too slow with the winch, you're both useless. You settle into a rhythm. The world shrinks down to the width of your pavis and the length of your bolt. The chaos of the larger battle, the screaming, the clashing of steel, the thunder of hooves is just background noise. It's like being in a very loud, very dangerous construction site. Every time you fire, the bow lets out a heavy, resonant thrum that you feel in your teeth. Then, back to the stirrup, back to the winch. Click, click, click. It's an industrial process, a slow-motion demolition of the old-world chivalry. The mud is starting to seep into your boots, and your shoulders ache from the repetitive strain of the crank. You feel a strange sense of detachment, a mechanical trance, not unlike the states induced by the Roman stimulants, but fueled by adrenaline and sheer physics instead of herbs. You are a part of the machine now. You are the operating system for a device made of wood, iron, and sturgeon glue. As you prepare to fire again, you realize that the sun is finally starting to break through the clouds, casting long, dramatic shadows across the blood-soaked field. The privacy of your pavis is about to be tested as the enemy begins their charge, and you'll find out exactly how much that painted saint is willing to do for you. The drizzle has finally stopped, but the ground is now a treacherous, slippery soup of clay and blood. You are still tucked behind your pavas, but the atmosphere has shifted. The distant thud of arrows hitting wood has been replaced by a much more terrifying sound. The rhythmic, heavy pounding of hooves. The knights are coming. To anyone else, a charging knight is a terrifying vision of flashing steel and unstoppable momentum. A medieval tank covered in heraldry. To you, however, he's just a very large, very loud target with an outdated hardware problem. You are the peasant sniper, and the men on those horses absolutely despise your existence. You watch through the narrow gap between your shield and your companion's shoulder as the noblemen lower their lances. They look like icons printed on a font, pristine and gleaming, representing centuries of social hierarchy. In their world, war is a sport for the elite, a chance to show off expensive armor and win ransoms. But you've ruined the game. It is a mainstream historical fact that noblemen viewed the crossbow as a cowardly and dishonorable weapon because it allowed a commoner, a man who might not even own a horse or a decent pair of boots, to kill a high-born lord from a distance without ever looking him in the eye. You are the original cheat code of the battlefield, a disruption that makes their 20 years of sword training irrelevant in the span of a single mechanical thrum. You feel the vibration in the earth, a low-frequency rumble that makes the water in the muddy puddles dance. You reach for your next bolt, your fingers fumbling slightly against the greasy leather of your quiver. Your hands are stained with that pungent animal fat you use to waterproof the string, and your gambeson is so heavy with sweat and rainwater it feels like it's trying to pull you into the mud. You're exhausted, but the sight of that approaching steel gives you a sharp, jagged jolt of adrenaline, the only stimulant you have left. You slide the bolt into the groove, the heavy steel bodkin head designed specifically for this moment. A quirky and fringe tidbit of medieval law is that captured crossbowmen were often treated far more brutally than any other type of soldier. While a knight might be captured and held for a lucrative ransom, a crossbowman was frequently executed on the spot, or worse, had his trigger fingers chopped off so he could never wind a winch again. The nobility didn't just want to defeat you, they wanted to delete you. They saw your weapon as a social heresy. You aren't just a soldier, you're an illegal download of military power that threatens to crash the entire feudal system. Knowing this doesn't make you want to surrender. It makes you want to be very, very accurate. You wait for the lead knight to get within 50 yards. You can see the individual links in his mail and the colorful silk of his surcoat, a vibrant splash of red and gold in this gray, muddy world. He's shouting a battle cry that probably sounds very heroic in his own head, but to you, it's just noise. You settle the stock of the crossbow against your cheek, feeling the cold grain of the wood. You aren't aiming for the thickest part of his breastplate. You're aiming for the neck, the visor, or the horse's chest. You're a technician looking for the system vulnerability. Historians still argue whether the crossbow's primary impact on the Middle Ages was tactical or social. Did it change how battles were fought, or did it fundamentally undermine the divine right of the nobility by proving that a peasant with a machine was more powerful than a lord with a lineage? As you squeeze the trigger, you aren't thinking about social theory. The bow releases with a violent jumping kick that rattles your teeth. The string slaps against the damp wood and the bolt vanishes into the air. The knight doesn't fall gracefully. There's no slow motion, cinematic collapse. One second he's a formidable wall of iron, and the next he's a tangled mess of limbs and armor sliding off the back of his horse. The bolt has found a gap, punching through the impenetrable mail as if it were made of paper. The horse, panicked by the sudden weight shift and the smell of blood, bolts toward the tree line. The silence behind your pavis is absolute for a heartbeat, broken only by the heavy breathing of your shield bearer. You've just uninstalled a man whose family has ruled his lands for 300 years, and all it took was a bit of tension and a piece of bone. The reaction from the enemy line is immediate. They aren't just angry, they're offended. Another wave of arrows arches towards you, but you're already ducking back into your bunker. You reach for the winch, your muscles screaming as you start the click, click, click process all over again. The irony of your situation isn't lost on you. You are the most efficient killer on the field, yet you spend 90% of your time hiding behind a piece of oak, wrestling with the crank. It's like being a high-end gamer with a really powerful rig, but your internet connection is so slow you can only fire one shot per minute. You look down at your crossbow, noticing a small crack in the wooden stock. The humidity and the constant stress of the high-tension string are taking their toll. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen. Stories you heard about the ancient Egyptians. People have always used weird stuff to protect themselves from the elements. You wish you had something better than pig fat and sturgeon glue to keep this machine together. If the wood splits, you're just a man in a wet mattress holding a very expensive stick. You whisper a quick prayer to the saint on your shield, not for your soul, but for the structural integrity of the bow. The battle is a chaotic, swirling mess around you. You see the longbowmen to your left, their arms moving in a blurred rhythm as they rapid fire into the charging infantry. They look like they're part of some organic, fluid dance. You, meanwhile, are part of a factory line. You are the heavy industry of the medieval war machine. You feel a strange sense of pride in your clunkiness. You aren't artisanal, you're standardized. You're the precursor to the musket, the first hint that the age of the individual hero is coming to an end, replaced by the age of the effective tool. As you finish cocking the bow for the next shot, you feel a drop of sweat sting your eye. The sun is higher now, and the steam is starting to rise from the damp ground, creating a hazy, surreal atmosphere. You take a quick look at your pavisier. He's still there, still holding the wall, though he's now covered in a fine layer of mud kicked up by the horses. You realize that you've survived the first charge. The social order has been shaken, and the peasant snipers are still standing. You slide another bolt into place, ready to continue your work as the most hated and most effective man in the mud. The adrenaline of the charge has begun to recede, replaced by the deep, thrumming ache that defines the life of a mechanical soldier. The battlefield has settled into a grisly, static stalemate, and the air is thick with the smell of wet iron, churned earth, and the metallic tang of blood that has finally begun to cool in the mud. For the knight, the battle is a series of explosive moments. For you, it is a long shift job at a very dangerous factory. You aren't celebrating your direct hit on the nobleman. You're already looking at your equipment, calculating the wear and tear on a machine that is literally trying to pull itself apart. You sit back on your heels behind the pavis, taking a rare moment to breathe. Your hands are a mess, blistered from the winch, stained dark with grease, and trembling slightly from the repetitive strain. This is the after-battle reality that the tapestries never show. While the victors are busy rounding up prisoners for ransom and the losers are fleeing into the woods, a crossbowman is essentially an IT technician in a disaster zone. Your weapon is a complex assembly of wood, horn, sinew, and glue, and every time you fire it, the vibration causes microscopic damage. If you don't maintain it now, the next time you pull the trigger, the whole thing might turn into a face full of high velocity splinters. It is a mainstream historical fact that professional crossbowmen were among the most meticulously prepared soldiers of the Middle Ages, often carrying maintenance kits that included spare strings, beeswax, animal fats, and small files. You pull out a small, greasy rag and begin the unglamorous work of cleaning the nut, the revolving trigger mechanism. If a single grain of sand from this muddy field gets jammed in there, the bow won't fire, or worse, it will fire prematurely, which is a polite way of saying it will take your thumb off. You're meticulously wiping away the grit, your movements slow and practiced. You're like a modern soldier cleaning his rifle after a firefight, but your high-tech lubricant is a jar of rendered pig fat. A quirky and fringe tidbit of the medieval arms trade is that the best crossbow bolts, the quarrels, were so expensive and time-consuming to produce that soldiers were often expected to go out onto the field after the fighting stopped to scavenge them from the bodies of the fallen. You look out over the mud at the harvest waiting for you. Each bolt represents a skilled fletcher's time and a blacksmith's labor. You can't just leave them there. That's like leaving $20 bills scattered in a swamp. You imagine yourself later, trudging through the muck, pulling your ammunition out of shields, trees, and, less pleasantly, human rib cages. It's a grisly, zero-waste approach to warfare that turns a glorious battlefield into a second-hand parts warehouse. As you work on the bow, you notice the leather wrapping around the lath. The main body of the bow is starting to peel. You reach for a small pot of glue. This isn't the stuff you buy at a craft store. It's a thick, pungent resin that you have to keep warm to use. Historians still argue whether the transition from wooden bows to composite bows made of horn and sinew was a response to the increasing thickness of plate armor or if it was simply a tech race between rival Italian city-states trying to outdo each other's stopping power. Either way, it made your job harder. A composite bow is more powerful, but it's also more temperamental than a moody teenager. It hates the cold, it despises the rain, and it requires constant retuning to keep the limbs balanced. You feel a sense of camaraderie with your pavessier, who is currently using a dagger to scrape the thickest layers of mud off the bottom of the shield. You've shared this wooden box for hours, and you've developed a shorthand of nods and grunts. He's the hardware, and you're the software. You offer him a piece of hard, salt-cured bacon, a snack that is less like food and more like a leathery endurance test. It's a far cry from the Roman feast or even the spiced Mulsum wine. In this world, breakfast is less like a recipe and more like an ongoing edible experiment in how much salt a human kidney can process before it gives up. The sun is low now, casting long, skeletal shadows across the field. You see other crossbowmen in your company doing the same thing, cleaning, greasing, and checking for cracks. You look like a group of gearheads at a car meet if the cars were made of wood and used to kill people. There's a strange, quiet dignity in this maintenance. It's the boring part of history that keeps the exciting part from ending in a catastrophe. You're maintaining the tools of a social revolution in the middle of a mud pit. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen again? The lengths people go to for protection. Your protection is this layer of grease and the integrity of a sturgeon glue bond. Your back is screaming at you. The constant stooping to winch the bow has left you with a permanent crossbowman's hunch. You stretch, feeling your vertebrae pop like dry kindling. You realize that your body is just another part of the machine that needs maintenance. You take a swallow of that sour, watery ale, feeling it burn a path down your throat. It doesn't give you a high, but it dulls the sharpest edges of the exhaustion. You're navigating a world where wellness is just staying vertical long enough to get paid. The camp followers are starting to move onto the field now, the vultures of the medieval world looking for gold rings and decent boots. You know you need to get out there soon to find your bolts before they disappear into someone's sack. You stand up, your gambeson, feeling like it weighs 100 pounds now that the water has settled into the fibers. You pick up your crossbow, feeling its familiar weight. It's clean, it's greased, and for now, it's stable. You've survived the rain, the nights, and the mechanical tension of the day. As the first stars begin to poke through the fading blue of the sky, you start your walk into the harvest zone. The mud is cold against your ankles, and the silence of the field is punctuated only by the distant cawing of crows and the clink of scavengers' tools. You've moved from the high-performance bloodlust of the Roman arena to the industrial grind of the medieval field. You're a man of the crank and winch, a servant of the machine, but your journey isn't over. The stimulants of the spirit are calling from a much older, much more mysterious place. You're leaving the mud of France behind and heading toward the misty, gas-filled caves of ancient Greece, where the tension isn't in a bowstring, but in the breath of a god. The cold, clinging mud of the French battlefield and the rhythmic click, click, click of your crossbow winch melt away into a warm, sulphurous haze. You find yourself standing on a jagged limestone cliff, the air shimmering with a heat that feels ancient and heavy. You are in Delphi, the navel of the world, and the ground beneath your feet is vibrating with a power that has nothing to do with mechanical tension. The gray, overcast skies of the Middle Ages have been replaced by the searing, unforgiving blue of the Greek sun. You aren't a technician anymore. You are a pilgrim, and you have come to see the most powerful influencer of the ancient world, the Pythia. You trudge up the sacred way, your sandals kicking up a fine, white marble dust that coats your ankles. The path is lined with treasuries, small, ornate buildings that are essentially the ancient version of bank vaults filled with gold and silver offered by city-states trying to outflex each other. You feel a familiar itch, but it's not from a wool gambeson. It's a dry, salt-heavy air of the Mediterranean. You probably won't survive this, or at least your sanity won't, because you're about to encounter a level of spiritual stimulation that makes a Roman Bacchus festival look like a quiet afternoon tea. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments, if you could ask an ancient oracle one question about your future, what would it be? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease back into tonight's journey together. You reach the Temple of Apollo, a massive structure that seems to grow directly out of the mountain. Inside, the air is cooler but thick with a strange, sweet scent, like rotting fruit mixed with the sharp tang of a chemistry lab. This is the breath of Apollo. You watch as a woman, the Pythia, prepares for her shift. She isn't a young, ethereal girl. She's an older woman, a local who has given up her life to be the god's mouthpiece. It is a mainstream historical fact that for centuries, the Oracle of Delphi was the most influential political and religious institution in the Greek world, consulted by everyone from lowly farmers to kings like Croesus and Alexander the Great. No war was started and no colony was founded without a green light from this cave. You follow the priests into the Adyton, the restricted area at the back of the temple. In 2025, we'd call this the Backstage VIP Lounge, but the vibe here is much more looming existential dread. The Pythia takes her seat on a bronze tripod, positioned directly over a deep fissure in the rock. As she sits, the sweet-smelling gas begins to swirl around her. This is where the ancient world meets modern geology. A quirky and fringe tidbit, though increasingly backed by science, is that the Temple of Apollo sits at the intersection of two major fault lines. Modern researchers have found traces of ethylene and benzene in the spring water and soil at Delphi. Ethylene, in small doses, produces a state of lightheaded euphoria and detached speech. It's essentially a geological glue-sniffing session sanctioned by the gods. You watch as the Pythia's eyes begin to roll back. Her breathing becomes shallow and rhythmic, a sleepy ASMR cadence that starts to sync with the flickering torchlight. She's not tripping in the modern recreational sense. She's being chemically lobotomized by the earth itself. To the Greeks, this was the god Apollo entering her body, tuning her vocal cords to broadcast the frequency of the future. To you, watching the way her hands twitch and her jaw slackens, it looks like a severe medical emergency. But in the ancient world, a seizure was just a notification from Mount Olympus. The head priest, the prophet, stands ready with a stylus and a tablet. He is the user interface for this divine computer. The Pythia begins to speak, but it's not a coherent sentence. It's a stream of word salad, moans, sharp barks, and fragmented nouns. It's the original glitch in the Matrix, a human brain trying to process high concentrations of petrochemical fumes while a crowd of desperate men wait for a sign. Historians still argue whether the Pythia's prophecies were purely the result of these gases, or if the priests were moderating the output, taking her incoherent babble and editing it into the cryptic, poetic hexameters that were eventually delivered to the public. It's like a live-to-tape broadcast where the producer does all the heavy lifting in post-production. You feel a bit lightheaded yourself just standing in the doorway. The scent of the ethylene is cloying, making your vision blur around the edges. You think back to the Roman opium and the mad honey. People have always looked for ways to bypass the firewall of the conscious mind. Here at Delphi, the stimulant isn't something you eat or drink, it's the very air you breathe. It's a passive smoke epiphany. You realize that the entire Greek geopolitical landscape was steered by a woman sitting on a stool, huffing tectonic vapors. It's a terrifyingly fragile way to run a civilization. The Pythia's voice suddenly drops an octave, becoming a rasping, rhythmic chant. She's talking about wooden walls and shattering empires. The priest scribbles furiously. This content will decide the fate of thousands. You notice the sweat beads on the Pythia's forehead, glistening in the light of the oil lamps. She looks exhausted, her body a sacrificial battery for the state's decision-making process. The stimulants of Delphi didn't just give you a high, they gave you a burden of knowledge that usually ended in a riddle. You look at the walls of the temple, inscribed with the famous maxims, know thyself, and nothing in excess. It's the ultimate irony. The place that preaches moderation is built on a foundation of geological intoxication. The Pythia is currently the least moderate person in Greece, her nervous system being fried by the breath of the earth so that the rest of the world can stay rational. It's a system trade-off that makes the Middle Ages mechanical grind feel simple by comparison. As you turn to leave the temple, the bright Greek sun hits you like a physical blow. The visions of the dark cave fade, but the sweet, rotting smell of the gas lingers in your hair and clothes. You've seen how the elite of the ancient world manage their futures, not with data or logic, but with a stimulated trance delivered by a fault line. You feel a strange sense of relief to be back in the fresh air, away from the divine fumes. But the journey through the altered states of history isn't over. You're moving away from the high-stakes riddles of Delphi and toward the high-performance grit of the mountains, where the stimulants are made of muscle, cold water, and the sheer will to survive. The sweet, dizzying scent of the ethylene fume still clings to your hair like a bad memory as you step out of the Adyton and back into the blinding clarity of the Greek afternoon. You aren't leaving Delphi just yet, though. You've seen the engine room where the Pythia huffs the breath of the gods, but now you're standing in the waiting room of history. And the atmosphere is electric with a different kind of stimulation. Pure, unadulterated political anxiety. You are no longer just a curious observer. You are now part of a diplomatic delegation from a major city-state, and you're carrying a leather pouch full of silver coins that weighs enough to make your shoulder ache. You look around at the crowd milling about the sacred way. This isn't just a religious site. It's the ancient world's version of a high-stakes consulting firm or a geopolitical Twitter where every tweet costs a fortune and could start a war. You see men in expensive linen tunics from Athens, rugged, soldiers from Sparta looking uncomfortable in the heat, and wealthy merchants from Lydia draped in enough gold to pay for a small navy. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Oracle of Delphi acted as a supreme court for the Greek world, mediating disputes and giving the divine stamp of approval to everything from new laws to the colonization of distant lands. If you wanted to build a city in Sicily or declare war on your neighbor, you didn't check the data. You checked with the woman in the cave. You find yourself stuck in the queue. In 2025, we complain about being on hold with a customer service bot for 20 minutes. Here, being on hold can take weeks. You're waiting for your turn to approach the altar of Apollo, but there's a hierarchy to the madness. A quirky and fringe tidbit of Delphic bureaucracy is the concept of promentia, or priority boarding. If your city-state had done a big favor for Delphi, like building a fancy treasury or donating a massive bronze statue of a bull, you got to skip to the front of the line. It was the original fast pass, a way for the wealthy and powerful to ensure they got their divine download before the smaller, poorer basic tier pilgrims even got a look in. You trudge over to the Castalian Spring, where you're supposed to purify yourself before the consultation. The water is ice cold, coming straight off the mountain, and as you splash it on your face, it shocks a lingering ethylene fuzz right out of your system. You notice a group of priests, the propheti, watching the crowd. These guys are the system administrators of the oracle. They are the ones who take the Pythia's incoherent groans and compile them into the beautiful, rhyming Greek poetry that the envoys take home. Historians still argue whether the priests of Delphi operated a sophisticated international intelligence network, essentially acting as the world's first CIA. Think about it. They had envoys from every corner of the Mediterranean sitting in their waiting room for weeks, gossiping, complaining, and trying to outdo each other. By the time a king actually got into the temple to ask a question, the priest probably already knew his financial situation, his military strength, and exactly which of his neighbors was planning to stab him in the back. The prophecy wasn't just divine inspiration, it was a high-level data analysis disguised as a supernatural mystery. You watch a nervous envoy from a small island city-state approach the priest. He's asking if they should go to war with a rival. The priests conduct the goat test. They splash cold water on a sacrificial goat. If the goat shivers, Apollo is in the office and ready to talk. If the goat just stands there looking confused, The oracle is closed for the day. It's a terrifyingly low-tech server status check. Luckily for the envoy, the goat shivers, and he's ushered into the shadows of the temple. You imagine the weight on his shoulders. He's about to get an answer that is designed to be as vague as a terms of service agreement, yet it will decide the lives of thousands. Modern audiences might compare the oracle's advice to those cryptic horoscopes you find in the back of a magazine, but the stakes here are significantly higher than you will meet a tall stranger. Remember the most famous fail in Delphic history? King Croesus of Lydia asked if he should attack the Persians. The oracle told him that if he crossed the river, he would destroy a great empire. He went ahead, crossed the river, and promptly got his own empire deleted. The oracle wasn't wrong. She just hadn't specified which empire. It's the ultimate user error in the history of communication. The sun begins to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across the marble columns. The air in Delphi starts to cool, smelling of roasting goat meat and the pine trees that cling to the cliffs of Mount Parnassus. You feel a strange sense of exhaustion, not the physical crossbowman exhaustion, but a mental information overload. You are navigating a world where the stimulant is the suspense itself. Everyone here is high on the possibility of a better future, or crashing on the fear of a divine no. You see the Athenian delegation leaving the temple, their faces pale. They've just been given the famous wooden walls prophecy during the Persian invasion. Some think it means they should hide behind the wooden fences of the Acropolis. Others, like Themistocles, argue it means they need to build a navy. It's a software patch for a national crisis, and the entire fate of Western civilization is currently hanging on how they interpret a few lines of drugged-out poetry. You realize that the divine geopolitics of Delphi isn't about giving answers, it's about providing a framework for the chaos. The boring reality of Delphi is that it was a massive, ancient think tank powered by geological gases and elite gossip. It allowed the Greeks to feel like they had a plan in a world that was fundamentally unpredictable. You take a final sip of the spring water, the metallic taste lingering on your tongue. The tension of Delphi is starting to fade as the priests begin to close the heavy bronze doors of the temple. The spirit stimulants have done their work for the day. As you prepare to leave the navel of the world, you feel a shift in the narrative. The riddles and the fumes of Greece are becoming a memory, and the air is getting sharper, thinner, and much more primitive. You're moving away from the civilized high of the oracle and toward the raw energy of the mountains further north. You're heading toward the Illyrians, where the only prophecy that matters is how fast you can run and how far you can throw a rock. The consulting firms are closing and the survival training is about to begin. You walk away from the heavy bronze doors of the temple, the pouch of silver now significantly lighter and your head feeling significantly heavier. The prophecy you just received is rattling around in your brain like a loose bolt in a machine. It was something about finding a path where the water meets the stone, which is about as helpful as a weather app that only tells you it might be cloudy somewhere. This is the hangover of the Delphic experience, the realization that you've spent a fortune to be told a riddle that will probably lead to your spectacular ruin. You are witnessing the riddles and ruin phase of the oracle, the moment when the high of divine certainty crashes into the cold, hard reality of human error. You find a spot to sit on a crumbling marble bench overlooking the Pleistos Valley. From here, the world looks peaceful, but you know better. You've just seen how the sausage is made in the engine room of ancient geopolitics, and it's a lot more human than the priest would like you to believe. It is a mainstream historical fact that as the Roman Empire expanded, the Oracle of Delphi began a long, agonizing decline, moving from the supreme court of the world to something more akin to a legacy tourist attraction for curious emperors and bored philosophers. The tech cycle of the Oracle was finally reaching its end-of-life stage, and the user base was migrating to new systems of belief. You watch a group of Roman soldiers passing by, their iron armor clanking in a way that sounds aggressively modern compared to the ancient stone of the temple. These aren't pilgrims. They're customers who don't take no for an answer. You remember the stories of Sulla, the Roman general who treated the temple of Apollo like his personal ATM. When he needed to pay his legions during the siege of Athens in 86 BC, he didn't ask the Pythia for advice. He sent his men in to strip the gold from the walls and borrow the ancient treasures. A quirky and fringe tidbit of this era is that Sulla supposedly laughed at the weeping priests, telling them that the sounds of music they heard coming from the inner sanctum weren't the god Apollo being angry, but rather the god rejoicing that his gold was finally going to a good cause, namely paying Sulla's bills. It's the ancient version of civil asset forfeiture, backed up by 10,000 swords. You lean back, the sun warming your face, and think about the psychological toll of the riddle. Historians still argue whether the oracle's eventual irrelevance was caused by a sudden clogging of the geological gas vents, effectively a divine internet outage, or if the Greek world simply outgrew its parental supervision and began to favor rationalism and Stoic philosophy over tectonic huffing. If you can't trust the server to give you a straight answer, you eventually stop paying the subscription fee. The riddle became a joke, a sign that the gods had stopped talking and the priests were just freestyling to keep the lights on. The air in Delphi is still beautiful, but it feels thinner now, less charged. You imagine the later years of the Oracle during the reign of Nero. He didn't just loot the place, he was so offended by a prophecy that suggested he'd killed his mother, which he had, that he ordered the sacred fissure to be filled with lead and the priest to be executed. It was an ultimate one-star review, a literal attempt to mute the divine because the content didn't match the user's expectations. You realize that winning a prophecy often means losing everything else. The more precise the gods got, the more people hated them. The more vague they stayed, the more they were ignored. You look down at your sandals, now covered in the fine white dust of the sacred way. This dust is all that's left of the influence that once steered the course of Western civilization. You feel a strange sense of empathy for the last of the Pythias, the women who were still sitting on that tripod even when the gas had stopped flowing and the kings had stopped coming. There's a story about one of the final consultations where a Pythia was forced to go into the Adyton even though the omens were bad. She went into a genuine, non-divine convulsion, panicked, and died shortly after. It's a sobering reminder that medicine is really just polite torture with a theology degree when the doctor is a priest and the patient is a prop for a dying institution. The final prophecy of Delphi is perhaps the most haunting. When the Emperor Julian the Apostate tried to revive the oracle in 362 AD, the Pythia reportedly told his envoy, "Tell the king the hall has fallen to the ground. Apollo no longer has his house, nor the prophetic laurel, nor the speaking fountain. Even the talking water has dried up." It's the final log off, the sound of a system shutting down forever. The spirit stimulants had finally run out, leaving only the cold stone and the silent mountains. You stand up, brushing the marble dust from your tunic. The tension of the oracle is gone. replaced by a quiet, melancholy stillness. You've seen the high performance blood of the arena, the mechanical grind of the crossbow, and the geological visions of the cave. Now you feel a need for something more grounded, something that doesn't rely on gases or winches. You're ready to leave the over-civilized world of Greece and Rome behind. Your journey is taking you north, into the rugged, unforgiving terrain of the Balkans. You're heading toward the Illyrians, a people who don't care about riddles or wooden walls. For them, the only stimulant that matters is the burn in your lungs as you race up a mountain and the weight of a boulder in your hands. The navel of the world is a beautiful ruin, but the heart of your journey is about to find its rhythm in the raw, unpolished strength of a culture that turns survival into a sport. You take one last look at the temple of Apollo, the scent of pine needles finally overcoming the last lingering traces of the divine breath, and begin your long trek toward the jagged peaks of the north. The silent, decaying marble of Delphi and the lingering scent of tectonic gases fade into a sharp, biting wind that tastes of pine needles and limestone. You wake up, and the world has lost its civilized polish. You are no longer navigating the subtle politics of a city-state or the mechanical nuances of a winch. You are standing on a jagged ridge in the heart of the Illyrian mountains, what we now call the Balkans. The ground beneath your feet isn't a paved road. It's a chaotic mosaic of loose shale and stubborn scrub brush that smells like wild thyme and old leather. You probably won't survive this, mainly because your modern concept of fitness involves a comfortable gym with air conditioning and a smoothie bar, whereas here, the gym is a vertical cliff face and the pre-workout is the fear of falling off it. You are wearing a simple, rugged tunic made of heavy, undyed wool that is even itchier than the Roman version, held together by a thick leather belt. Your feet are wrapped in primitive hide sandals that let you feel every sharp edge of the rock. In this world, physical strength isn't a hobby or a way to look good in a mirror. It's the only currency that matters. You look at the men around you, the Illyrians. They are lean, ropey, and look like they've been carved out of the mountain itself. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Illyrians were regarded by both the Greeks and the Romans as some of the most formidable, physically resilient people in the ancient world, eventually becoming the backbone of the later Roman legions and providing several of the empire's soldier emperors. You watch as a group of young men prepare for a race. This isn't a 5K on flat pavement with a participation medal at the end. They are lining up at the base of a slope that looks like it has a 45-degree incline, covered in loose boulders and thorny bushes. The goal isn't just to be fast, it's to be the first one to reach a specific outcrop of rock at the summit without breaking an ankle. This is high-altitude CrossFit before the invention of the wheel. To a modern eye, this looks like a Spartan race where the organizers forgot to add the safety padding and the liability waivers. You feel a sympathetic burn in your calves just looking at the terrain. You take a deep breath and the air is so thin and cold it feels like it's scraping the inside of your lungs. This is altitude training in its purest form. A quirky and fringe tidbit of Illyrian culture is that they reportedly practiced breath-holding rituals while running uphill, believing that by starving the body of air during extreme exertion, they could harden the spirit and make themselves invisible to the exhaustion that claims lesser men. It's the original biohacking, a way to push the human machine past its factory settings using nothing but the rugged geography of the Balkans. You imagine yourself trying this, your lungs screaming, your vision tunneling, and realize that survival is the only sport that counts here. You start the climb, and every step is a gamble. Your muscles start to hum with the deep, familiar fatigue we've encountered throughout this journey, from the Roman arena to the medieval mud. But here, there's no stimulant to help you. There's no spiced wine, no poppy syrup, and no sacred gas. There is only the rhythmic thud 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 of your heart against your ribs. You realize that for the Illyrians, the mountain itself is the winch that tensions a human body. They don't need machines because they are the machines. Historians still argue whether the Illyrians possessed a formal, organized system of athletic competition like the Greek Olympic Games, or if their legendary physical prowess was simply a brutal byproduct of their pastoral, raiding-based lifestyle. In a world where you have to chase down a runaway goat or outrun a rival tribe's scouting party every other Tuesday, training is just what you call living. It's an organic, artisanal brutality that makes the Roman gymnasiums look like a daycare center. You're navigating a society where your social credit score is measured by how much weight you can carry up a mountain and how long you can hold your breath in a cold river. You reach a small plateau and the view is breathtaking. A jagged sea of gray peaks and dark green valleys stretching out towards the Adriatic. You see a group of older men wrestling in a patch of dirt. This isn't the technical wrestling of the Greeks with their complex rules and point systems. This is more like a controlled riot. They are coated in sweat and dust, their movements explosive and raw. There's no cable television here, no theaters, and no oracles. The entertainment is watching two men try to throw each other into a thorny bush. It's the minimalist version of the Roman arena. Stripped of the gold, the exotic animals, and the drugs, you feel a strange sense of clarity. The haze of the previous sections, the lead-poisoned wine, the mechanical tension, the geological fumes has been blown away by the mountain wind. This is the sober side of history, a world where the only restart button is a night of deep, dreamless sleep on a bed of pine boughs. Your body feels heavy, but it also feels real, in a way it hasn't since we started this journey. You are no longer a spectator, you are part of the terrain. The itchy wool of your tunic has become a second skin, a constant reminder of the grit required to stay alive. You notice one of the Illyrians watching you. He has a scar across his shoulder that looks like it was earned from a wolf or a very angry Roman, and his eyes are the color of the limestone. He doesn't offer you a drink or a riddle, he just nods toward the next ridge. The next step is always upward. You realize that the Illyrian grit is a form of mental stimulation all its own. The constant challenge, the perpetual uphill nature of existence keeps the brain in a state of high alert readiness. It's a natural high, fueled by adrenaline and the sheer satisfaction of not being dead yet. As the sun begins to dip behind the peaks, casting long purple shadows across the valley, you feel a deep, grounding exhaustion. It's not the crashing feeling of a drug-induced high. It's the honest tiredness of a body that has been used to its full capacity. You've moved from the refined stimulants of the South to the raw strength of the North. You're learning that performance isn't always about what you put into your body. Sometimes it's about what the world demands from it. You take a final look at the race finishing at the summit. The winner isn't celebrating with the trophy. He's just standing there, hands on his knees, breathing in the cold air as if it's the most precious thing in the world. You're ready to move deeper into this combat culture, to see how these mountain runners turn their survival skills into the weapons that would one day challenge the very empire we started with. The sport is about to get even more physical as the sun sets and the real training begins. The purple shadows of the Balkan peaks stretch long and thin, like the fingers of a giant reaching across the valleys, and the temperature drops with a speed that makes your breath bloom in the air like ghostly white smoke. You are still among the Illyrians, but the track and field portion of the day is over. Now, the atmosphere shifts from the endurance of the climb to the explosive violence of bareback and boulders. You are standing in a natural amphitheater formed by a bend in a cold, rushing river and a limestone cliff. There are no marble seats here, no VIP boxes, and no imperial shade. The crowd is just a ring of tribesmen draped in heavy furs, their faces illuminated by the flickering orange glow of several large bonfires. You watch as two men approach the center of the ring. They aren't carrying swords or shields. They are carrying rocks, large, jagged boulders that look like they belong in the foundation of a wall rather than a sports arena. This is the Illyrian stone toss, a test of pure, raw, explosive power. It is a mainstream historical fact that many ancient tribes, including the Illyrians and the Celts, used stone putting as a primary method for measuring a warrior's strength and suitability for the front lines of battle. This isn't about the grace of a Greek discus throw. It's about the grunt of a man trying to move a piece of the mountain using nothing but his legs, back, and sheer stubbornness. One of the men, his chest glistening with sweat despite the cold, heaved a rock onto his shoulder. You can see the veins in his neck bulging, a map of the internal tension that we've seen in the medieval crossbow. But here, the tension is purely biological. He lets out a guttural roar, a sound that has no theology degree behind it, and launches a stone. It thuds into the soft earth a few yards away, a heavy, dead sound that vibrates through your own feet. There is no applause, just a collective, low-frequency hum of approval from the watchers. This is the cable television of the Illyrian night, watching the physical limits of the human frame being tested against the weight of the earth. Next comes the part that makes your modern sense of risk management curl into a fetal position, the bareback riding. A group of horses, small and sturdy with thick manes, are led into the firelight. They aren't the pampered, brushed stallions of a Roman parade. They are as rugged and ill-tempered as the men who ride them. A quirky and fringed tidbit of Illyrian equestrian culture is that they often disdained the use of saddles or even complex bridles, believing that a true warrior should be one with the beast. Through the grip of his thighs alone, they reportedly practiced jumping onto moving horses from a standing start, a feat that requires a level of core strength and reflexive stimulants that no modern gym can provide. You watch a young rider leap onto a horse that is clearly not interested in being a teammate. The animal bucks and twists, its hooves kicking up sparks from the stones near the fire. The rider clings on, his body absorbing the shocks like a biological spring. There is no opium restart button. Here, if he falls and gets trampled, the medical plan is a splash of river water and the advice to get up faster next time. This is extreme sports in its most literal, lethal sense. You realize that the Illyrians are stimulating their nervous systems through constant exposure to danger. They live in a state of perpetual fight or flight, which thickens their bones and sharpens their eyes. Historians still argue whether the Illyrians' reputation for savagery in combat was a genuine cultural trait or if it was a piece of psychological warfare they carefully cultivated to keep the more civilized empires at bay. If you know that the guys across the river spend their weekends tossing boulders and riding angry horses without a saddle, you might think twice about trying to text their sheep. It's the deterrent of the ancient world. You are witnessing a culture that has turned the raw materials of their environment, the rocks, the horses, the cold, into a training manual for war. The wrestling begins again, but now it's more intense. The men are using boulder lifting grips on each other's rib cages, their muscles locking in a desperate, static struggle. You feel the itchy wool of your own tunic, a constant reminder of the unprocessed nature of this world. There is no balsam wine to dull the pain, only the sharp, clean adrenaline that comes from physical confrontation. You realize that this is what the Roman ash tonic was trying to replicate, the mineral, heavy, raw resilience of a people who never left the training ground of the wilderness. As the night deepens, a drum begins to beat, a slow, rhythmic thud that matches the heartbeat of the mountains. A group of women joins the circle, carrying bowls of a thick, fermented drink made from grain and forest honey. It's not the divine wine of Bacchus, it's a heavy, yeasty brew that tastes like liquid bread and smoke. It's the fuel for the recovery. A high-calorie protein shake for a body that has just spent the day wrestling with gravity. You take a sip, and it's warm and comforting, but it doesn't make the world blur. It just makes the fire look a little brighter and the cold wind feel a little further away. You notice the Illyrian grit in the way they sit, back straight even in exhaustion, eyes always moving toward the shadows beyond the firelight. They are a people of the periphery, the ones who live on the edges of the maps drawn in Rome and Athens. You feel a strange sense of respect for this unsedated life. While the rest of the world is huffing gases and boiling lead syrup, these people are getting high on the sheer effort of existing in a place that wants to break them. The sensory language of the night is dominated by the smell of wood smoke, the musk of the horses, and the metallic scent of the river. You realize that your journey has come full circle. You started in the artificial highs of a city of 1 million people, moved through the mechanical tension of the medieval fields, and have finally arrived at the biological source. The Illyrians are the raw data from which the legends of the future will be written. They are the prototypes for the elite guards, the gladiators, and the emperors who will one day try to bring this mountain energy into the marble halls of the south. As the bonfires begin to burn down to glowing embers, casting a soft red light over the tired warriors, you feel the final wind down of the night approaching. The riddles of Delphi are gone, and the knights of France are a future memory. There is only the mountain, the fire, and the steady, rhythmic breathing of men who have tested their limits and found them to be further out than they imagined. You prepare to close your eyes, the tension in your own muscles finally beginning to release as you realize that the greatest stimulant of all is simply the knowledge that you have survived the day. The rhythmic, heavy thrum of the Roman oars eventually smooths out into the gentle, lapping waves of the Cydnus River in Asia Minor. You are standing on the riverbank in Tarsus, and the air has changed again. It no longer smells of the iron and gore of the Roman proscriptions. It smells of a dizzying, expensive cloud of cinnamon, frankincense, and myrrh. You are about to witness the ultimate merger and acquisition of the ancient world. Mark Antony is waiting on his tribunal, trying to look like a stern conqueror general, but the operating system of his resolve is about to crash. Rounding the bend of the river is a barge that makes the city of heaven look like a budget motel. The oars are silver, the sails are purple silk, and the person sitting under a gold filigree canopy is Cleopatra Sithevenu, the last pharaoh of Egypt and the world's most sophisticated ancient nerd. The mainstream historical fact is that Cleopatra didn't just show up to a meeting, she staged a total brand immersion. She arrived dressed as Aphrodite, surrounded by beautiful children dressed as cupids and maidens dressed as graces. To help you visualize this, imagine a modern diplomat arriving at a high stakes summit, not in a motorcade, but on a floating, neon lit luxury yacht that is broadcasting high definition art and pumping custom design fragrances into the air. Antony, the man who used to drive a chariot pulled by lions, is completely outflexed. He invites her to dinner. She tells him he should come to her place instead. In that one move, she establishes herself as the senior partner in the relationship. You watch as Antony falls into the Egyptian lifestyle, like a stone dropped into the Nile. He moves to Alexandria and joins Cleopatra's Society of Inimitable Livers. This wasn't a book club, it was a 24/7 lifestyle experiment dedicated to out-partying every other human on the planet. They spent their days playing high-stakes games and their nights wandering the streets of Alexandria in disguise, which, given their fame, was essentially the ancient version of a celebrity wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses at a gas station. Here is a quirky fringe tidbit. They once had a contest to see who could prepare the most expensive meal. Cleopatra won by taking a priceless pearl earring, dissolving it in a cup of strong vinegar, and drinking it. It's the ultimate sarcasm of wealth, consuming a small nation's GDP in a single sip just to prove a point to a guy who thinks he's Hercules. But while Antony is loading his days with wine and lotus flowers, back in Rome, Octavian is debugging the narrative. He is the ultimate information architect. He takes Antony's letters, his lifestyle choices, and his donations of Alexandria, where Antony basically gave away Roman provinces to Cleopatra's children, and uses them to launch the world's first cancel culture campaign. He portrays Antony not as a Roman hero, but as a legacy user who has been corrupted by an Oriental sorceress. Octavian doesn't declare war on Antony, he declares war on Cleopatra. It's a brilliant PR move that makes Antony look like a traitor if he stays with her and a coward if he leaves. The tension leads to the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, a naval clash off the coast of Greece that functions as the final boss fight of the Roman Republic. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's decision to flee the battle with her 60 ships was a pre-planned betrayal, a tactical retreat that went wrong, or a sudden system failure of nerves. Antony, seeing her sails retreating, does the unthinkable. He abandons his fleet and his men to follow her. He chooses the romance over the empire. It's a move that uninstalls his credibility forever. They retreat to Alexandria, a city that is now essentially a dead zone, waiting for Octavian's legions to arrive. The end is as cinematic as the beginning. You are in the tomb, Cleopatra, built for herself, watching the final shutdown. Antony, hearing a false report that Cleopatra is already dead, falls on his sword in the traditional, messy Roman fashion. He doesn't die instantly. Life is rarely that tidy, and he is hauled up by ropes into the tomb to die in her arms. Cleopatra, realizing that Octavian plans to parade her through Rome like a trophy icon, decides to take the admin exit. Whether it was the bite of an asp hidden in a basket of figs or a hollow hair needle filled with poison, the result is the same. The last of the pharaohs deletes herself from history on her own terms. The wolves of the medieval highway, the drunkards of Menkaure, and the Venetian nerds like Marco Polo, all of them were part of this long, winding road we've traveled tonight. You've seen how humans build pyramids with beer and onions, how they survive the bird call ambushes of the forest, and how they trade burning rocks for scandalous hospitality. You've seen that history isn't just a list of dates, it's a series of software updates to the human experience. As you stand in the fading light of the Alexandrian palace, the scent of the sea air mixing with the smell of guttering oil lamps, you realize that the world of the ancient ones is finally closing its tabs. The world is growing quiet now, the shouting of the Roman forum and the rhythmic clack of the Chinese night watchman fading into a soft, steady hum. You can feel the weight of the thousands of years we've walked through pressing gently into your mattress, turning into the kind of heavy, comfortable warmth that pulls at your eyelids. The wolves have gone back to the shadows, the sledges have stopped their grinding over the sand, and the silk sails of the Nile are drifting into a calm, dark harbor where the water is as still as glass. Everything you've seen tonight, the glint of a copper chisel, the flicker of a highwayman's lantern, the 3-foot hat of a Mongol queen, is just a story now, a distant echo in the vast, quiet library of the past. There are no more ramps to climb, no more bird calls to fear, and no more scandalous hospitality to navigate. You are safe, you are warm, and the terms and conditions of the modern world are currently on Do Not Disturb mode. Let the image of the Great Pyramid, glowing silver under a desert moon, be the last thing you see. It stands there, solid and unchanging, a reminder that even the biggest projects eventually reach their peak and fall silent. Your breathing is slowing down now, matching the long, slow rhythm of the Nile. The ink has dried on Marco Polo's parchment. The Roman legions have stacked their shields, and the drunkards of Menkaure are finally getting the rest they earned 4,000 years ago. The history of the world is vast, but tonight, your world is just a soft space between your thoughts and the quiet hum of the room. Close your eyes, let the shadows of the past fold into the velvet of the night, and let yourself drift away into the deep, dreamless peace that waits at the end of every long journey.